Welcome back to the Skift Travel Podcast. I'm Oliver, a Senior Director at Skift Advisory, joined by Skift's Global Tourism Reporter, Dawit, and Skift's Advisory's Director of Strategy, Aleix. Today's hot topic for this bonus episode, the tourism and perceived over-tourism backlash in Barcelona and other jurisdictions. In today's episode, we will explore Barcelona's escalating tourism backlash. Residents frustrated with overcrowding have resorted to using squirt guns against tourists. We'll discuss the roots of this discontent, the city's upcoming short-term rental ban, and solutions from other cities facing similar challenges. We'll delve into the balance between a thriving tourism industry and residents' quality of life. Okay, first question, Dawit. You've been covering these sorts of tourism backlash and over-tourism issues over the last few years. What are Barcelona residents' main complaints, and how do these protests compare to other tourist-heavy cities, maybe in Europe and around the world?
Yeah, so it was a big about 3,000 people protested. I think it was last Saturday, right? And they were made up of multiple organizations, about 140, and one of the leading ones, if I forget the name correctly, Assembly for Tourist Degrowth, if I get them right. And they had about these 13 proposals, and among the proposals, the key themes were banning short-term rentals, taking more action for more fair and working conditions, but also some radical stuff, particularly like reducing international flights, closing the cruise terminal, and stopping tourism promotion. They were among 13, but the overall point was they wanted a better management of tourism and limiting its negative effects on locals. And it was the latest protest following other ones in the past few weeks. We've seen most recent one being Malaga, Menorca, the Canary Islands. All these destinations have had huge influx of protesters saying, "Hey, we need to change direction. Things are not manageable. We're having over tourism. The city is no longer livable for local residents." So, and these are all in Spain, particularly. So, and Spain's been a big destination this past summer. It's doing very well. One of the hottest ones this year so far. I think, according to the European Travel Commission's latest report, tourism is up about I think 12 to 18% from the pre-pandemic levels. So Spain is just popping right now.
Seems to be exacerbating the problem. Now, look, I've got another question that's related to this, but I want to get to Aleix in a second. So, Aleix, you're actually from not necessarily Barcelona, but Girona, which is just outside Barcelona. So, you're pretty familiar with this issue. You lived with it throughout your life. Maybe just give us a little bit of context around the historical nature of this issue and why it's this tipping point now. Like, DeWitt's kind of mentioned, this backlash and other jurisdictions within Spain, but something has clearly happened now for this frustration to boil over. So, maybe just get into that historical aspect.
Yeah, look, so, from the 70s, Spain led the way in Europe in terms of tourism development. So, entire coastlines and small towns, so how large resorts, hotels, tall building blocks, and holiday homes totally transform and spoil landscapes and local economies alike. We're talking decades of uncontrolled tourism growth, which meant kind of a golden age for real estate developers, landowners, large hoteliers, and tour operators. In the recent years, though, to spice things up a little bit more, short-term rentals came into the mix in what was already a fragile tourism model. So the frustration that residents in Barcelona and other major tourism destinations are facing, not only in Spain, but across Europe, can be summarized into two main buckets. The first one is the disproportionate rising living costs, and the second one is the desertification of neighborhoods. Regarding the rising living cost, the over-tourism crisis is essentially a housing crisis. So short-term rentals have disrupted the property rental market, while on the other hand, foreign investment by non-residents has actually limited the ability of locals to acquire a home in their own cities.
And sorry,
In
Lush,
terms
with
of the
that,
desertification
do
of
Spanish
neighborhood,
rent more than they buy?
yeah,
Is this partly the problem that because there's such a demand for rental properties, or is it because of the tourist side of the equation?
traditionally it was more like a buying society. So if you look at like older generations, like from a very early age, like early 20s, like families would make the first step of buying a property. This has changed in the newer generations right now, where like residents are forced to some extent to stay in the rental market because it's like, yeah, impossible at this moment for with the current salary levels to access this property market. But then, like, on the other hand, with the densification of neighborhoods, this goes from having flows of thousands of visitors disembarking at once from large cruises, noise pollution, substitution of traditional businesses by soulless brunch spots, and the environmental pressure on things like, for example, water consumption. So
Mm.
Barcelona actually faced an extremely severe drought this last spring, but water usage limitations did not apply to hotels or tourism establishments, only to so not to the only to the residents, so the taxpayers. So just to sum up, the current situation is the result of years and probably decades of public policy failing to resolve the negative impact of tourism in destinations facing over tourism.
Yeah, I was going to add, one of the proposals mentioned among the 13 is they want the water management rules, right? They want the tourism industry not to be an essential industry that got some of the provisioning and help from current city policies. So it's one of everything you mentioned was listed in the proposals for a better management of tourism to Barcelona.
Yeah.
Dawit, you've been seeing these. Sorry, one second, Aleix. Dawit, you've been seeing these, issues in other jurisdictions. I think looking at those other jurisdictions in Barcelona, do you think that the local city government and also the tourism department are adequately kind of dealing with these issues that Aleix is mentioning, and at the same point too addressing the protests?
Well, so recently, what their response has been from the mayor, at least from what I've seen, is he said we are doing something about it. In his posts on X in public, he's saying we are doing the following things: we are banning short-term rentals, making them more available to residential use. I'm trying to stop all these day trippers from the cruise industry. Doing some tourist management policy across the high influx areas across Barcelona. They're increasing the tourist tax. Essentially he's been reaffirming that we are doing something, that's what he's saying, to deal with these problems. It's not a simple solution and we're working on it, but we are doing something. And then at the tourism minister level, the national level, what I've seen is like condemnation, particularly of some stuff, particularly the squirting of water guns by
Mm.
some of the protesters. They've been reported, people are shooting water guns at tourists while they're dining. And the ministry has said, hey, Spain is welcoming. We condemn these actions. This is not what Spain is about. Don't look at that. Don't take that as face value of what we're about. So I
So they
mean,
seem to be siding with the tourists and not necessarily siding or leaning towards the frustrations of the residents.
yeah, I didn't see any acknowledgement from the ministry on that front, but it was
Mm.
just more of a preserving business,
Mhm.
Mm.
particularly. And what I've seen, particularly from the industry, is that they also are condemning the actions of these particular people who squirted water guns. The industry, historically, from what I've seen, particularly, there's been a tension between the tourism industry and locals, whether about how when it comes to promotion, particularly, for example, like a lot of times I've seen unhappiness with too much tourism, too much promotion to Barcelona.
Unless, sorry, I did cut you off there, but maybe just provide a little bit of your response to that previous question. But I do want to get into also what SMEs or small businesses and the tourism businesses are dealing with. We tend to look at how the destination as a whole, or residents, or the tourists, but not necessarily the business aspect. So maybe if you could just highlight how businesses are impacted and maybe how they're sitting on this issue.
Yeah. So, like, while I absolutely don't agree that targeting visitors with, water guns is the solution, the lack of solution by those who should propose them,
Mm.
unfortunately, results into, some taking matter in their own hands. And
Mm.
we're actually today here talking about this topic partly because of this symbolic action to some extent. In terms of the impact to local businesses, so, I I believe that in general, Barcelona is and has always been an extremely welcoming city, as David was saying, and tourism has played a key role in transforming it. However, we are in high summer season now, so the backlash of one-off protests into the local businesses is very limited, in my opinion, at this point. One point to make here, though, is that you know local businesses that benefit from tourism have also a direct responsibility to contribute to ensure decent employment to residents. As low wages in the hospitality sector is another factor affecting the current social crisis. And normally these salaries do not increase in line with the business revenue and profit. So, our industry, it's, also like has a level of social responsibility here to be aware of.
which we're probably not paying attention to, right? Because we tend to look at the lowest cost inputs to get the highest cost return or profit for the tourism industry at the expense of those other soft costs that we don't necessarily realize are part of our tourism inputs: water usage, garbage collection, maintenance of roads, all the soft and hard infrastructure that tourism needs. It doesn't really fit into the equation. Look, I've got a question that kind of came up related to your, what we've been discussing over the last few minutes. Is there any sort of coordination that's happening with these protests throughout Spain? Duet, you mentioned Canary Islands. Obviously, we're hearing about Barcelona. Is there coordination in the protests? Do we know about that?
Well, you say coordination. Well, I mean between the different groups across the
Between the
not so
different
much.
groups, yeah.
I can't really tell on that front, but what I do see is a domino, like people following. Oh, they do this. It's our turn. Let's take action now, right? You
Mm.
see these happening over these coming weeks. It's not a coincidence. It's more people are just rising up from seeing their other fellow those afflicted standing up for themselves. From what it looks like on my end as a
Mm.
Yeah.
observer.
I mean, like the sponsors of each one of these protests are more like at local level. So while there may be like some level of, like inspiration or coordination or talks between the members, this has started like quite spontaneously. And while Canaries led the way with the first one, that quickly spread to over other destinations that are facing similar or even worse effects of mass tourism than Canaries. So from that aspect, but I think it's purely a more spontaneous demand of like a problem that has been existing there for a long time.
Well,
Versus copycat response.
yeah,
Yeah.
one common thing I noticed that it's very much neighborhood associations, like,
Yeah.
just getting together, neighborhood associations, activists. But the main group I keep seeing are people who are the locals who live in the neighborhoods and saying together, we need to change the direction things are going, or else we can't live here anymore. Right. So I think the neighborhood associations, I mean, I guess they're the equivalent of our homeowner association potentially in America, but, they that's what I find the local units really much leading these type of efforts. But there are a lot of groups involved of all strands of local societies.
Okay, let's get to short-term rentals and how this kind of fits into the equation. So, Barcelona made the decision relatively recently to ban all short-term rentals, less than 30 days by 2029, which is, in 5 years. It's a pretty bold move, and not many jurisdictions have actually done this type of step. Let's go to Aleix. What do you think is driving this policy, and what will it do in terms of ripple effects throughout both the accommodation market for tourists, leisure and business, and then also the housing market in Barcelona? And you can kind of speak to it from a perspective of not just a professional at Skift in the tourism industry, but also someone that has ties to the region.
Yeah, 100%. So, like with any political statement, my first thought here is let's see if this happens, how it happens, and when it happens. This statement has made it into most of our industry media, and while it is flashy, it still does not provide enough details, in my opinion, on how this
Mm.
actually could be implemented. How will the city fill the accommodation supply gap after this ban? Does the city need to fill this gap, or rather not? There's like some key implications with like super large impact here that are not being detailed. According to some of our partners' data, actually, 68% of Barcelona short-term rentals are concentrated into the downtown core,
Mm.
while 73% of listings are from owners that are at least listing another property. And to make things a bit more interesting, 57% of these rent more than 10 accommodations. So this is a clear red flag that the current short-term rental model, at least in Barcelona, is not benefiting the local communities it should, but large property owners that are driving up the housing market costs.
So, Lush, there's a lot of numbers there, but are you saying, or the numbers saying, that this is what speculative investors that are buying these properties and renting these properties out, or the professional organizations?
100%. That's like I mean, it can go from like owners that have been building their portfolio, and it's it's more like a proper like business setting, or like real estate developers or funds actually utilizing this model And I think that probably when Brian Chesky, for example, Airbnb started Airbnb, they did with the idea of let's allow these local communities to benefit from tourism development and
Mm.
hosting visitors and showing these visitors the authentic way of living and so on. So I believe that the model has grown into the opposite direction,
Mhm.
probably because of you know the lack of regulation, also opportunistic behavior, and uncontrolled tourism growth, I would say. But that's the fact
Mhm.
for Barcelona in terms of numbers. But I'd imagine that the situation can be probably a bit similar in other major European destinations, at least.
Well, it's good. The devil is in the details. And one thing I also it's just interesting is that that what the mayor said in his response to the protest, he was saying we're going to get 10,000 short-term rentals available to residents, but it's just like the people who own those properties can do something else with it. They
Mm.
could just not give it to the locals and keep it to themselves, or rent it out in a way that kind of avoids the regulations. I mean, there are medium rentals as well, right? They're medium and long term as well. So there are ways that this cannot very well not end up in the hands of locals, as they pointed out that the devil is in the details.
Yeah.
So maybe this is answering my next question, which is, really what's economically at stake for Barcelona if this policy is coming down the pipe, but to Lesh's point, we don't necessarily know when, how, and the details, the devil in the details, as you say, do it. I guess, can we speculate what the economic impact will be for Barcelona if this
Yeah.
policy comes into effect and we suddenly take this much supply out of the market?
Yeah, well, I mean, Barcelona's already pretty expensive, right, for tourists, and it's going to
Mm,
get more expensive. I mean, in New York City, right, after the recent Airbnb enforcement rules, right, New York City became more expensive. And I think but the thing is, they didn't ban all short-term rentals here. They just made it harder to do it, to have them listed. Now with Barcelona, I mean, if they do so, ban all short-term rentals, it's going to get more expensive. What we're going to see, I think, more tourists who are going to take advantage of the hostels, right, which is also popular, and hotels will become more expensive, benefiting from the higher costs, is what I think is going to happen.
Would this then unofficially stymie some tourism arrivals into the city if costs go up? That a
I think
certain
people
segment of the market won't come?
I think people will like find ways to stay in maybe the suburbs or stay outer
Mm,
of the city itself and come in to enjoy the destination. They'll find ways around it because Barcelona is just such an attractive destination. I can't imagine people are going to give up the chance to go to this city. I mean, it is the gateway city for a lot of American tourists who've never been to Europe before. So
mm,
I think people will just adjust to it by just staying further out from the city where the regulations don't apply.
okay. Now, this can't be the only policy that Barcelona is trying to implement to address this issue. Are there other things that they might be doing or they've announced that they're doing that would potentially have an impact on addressing this perceived over-tourism issue? Maybe this is just an open question to both of you, and maybe we don't have to necessarily talk about just what's happening in Barcelona, but other steps that have been taken in other jurisdictions.
So, so I recently heard the CEO of Barcelona Tourism in a conference mentioning a couple of initiatives to tackle the over tourism that is facing the city, mainly around destination marketing and appealing to the right type of visitor through the showcase of the authentic way of living and so on. While this is great and tackles some aspects of the demand side, I don't think authorities are currently focusing on solving the supply side effectively, which
Mm,
without a serious commitment to start thinking about topics like tourism degrowth, these are likely, trying to take out the water of a sinking ship with a bucket, in my opinion. Much more
oh
needs
God,
to
Aleix.
be done, I think.
Okay, the tourists in all of this, how are they responding to these potential policies that are coming up? And are they aware of the backlash in Barcelona other than the headlines that they're seeing? When they show up at Barcelona airport and then get to the downtown, are they prepared for what's happening right now?
Yeah, from the tourists, I've who are going to go or who plan to go or who have been there. I've not really. They either have not. Heard about it or They've not seen anything about it, and they've not been deterred. I think if this incident keeps replaying in the news cycle for a long time, then it could be a problem. But as long as people feel like it's not like there's no violence or there's no like blockage of the attractions that people want to go to Barcelona for. I've not seen any what do you call skittishness about going to the destination. It's just so attractive that people will bear anything to enjoy it. I have from tour operators though, who told me privately that they were just horrified by the images. They were telling
Mm.
me like, why would you do that? Why would you do this? You're going to scare people off from going to your destination. These images are going to make it harder to fill your hotels and your restaurants. And then they'll tell me that they are doing their best to limit their impact by having fewer days or reducing their group tours and allowing people to go by themselves, solo trips within their itineraries as well. But generally, at tourist side, it seems like they're all gung ho, and even the numbers bear it out too. If you look at, for example, Forward Keys, I think they're looking at the ticket data. It's about, I think, up to double digits for July already, right? In
In terms of
Barcelona,
bookings, yeah.
in bookings in Barcelona, and all the destinations that we've seen that have had these protests. So I think tourists just can't get enough of Barcelona at the moment.
And some of these other cities like Amsterdam and the Canary Islands.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so numbers are all up for all of them, according to the latest flight booking data.
Okay, let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to continue this conversation about Barcelona and these protests that are happening in other jurisdictions. Okay, Dawit, from a technology perspective, and innovations that are happening within the tourism industry. Our industry was one of the first to really adopt um, the internet in terms of widely adopting it from a channel perspective and a consumer engagement perspective 20 years ago. Same thing with social media. So we're looking constantly at technology and the use of how it can be adopted within the industry to sell and to engage with travel consumers. What have you heard from a technology perspective that could potentially address these issues? Tourism flows, the management of supply, the engagement of supply and demand.
Yeah, well, I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but definitely think AI could be a potential big use case. I attended a great conference at ITV Berlin, and a great talk was done by Dublin's tourism chief, and that they're trying to do like very cool itinerary personalized itinerary recommendations for folk, and I think that could really push flows from all the hotspots that are causing such a overcrowding of attractions. So I think AI could potentially be useful, personalized AI that gets people to explore other areas and not concentrate on particular areas that are causing such a huge mess of just overcrowding visitor stays. I think that's where I think I could see things getting pushed in the right direction when it comes to managing tourist flows.
So is this the tourism boards that are going to be doing this, or is it the private sector, or both?
Oh, so it's a mixture of both. So OpenAI partnered with Dublin City Council's their tourism bureau. The two of them are collaborating on a new a project that's going to do personalized itinerary recommendations for visitors before they come to Dublin. So it's a collaboration between the private sector and public sector.
Okay, I don't want to sound too controversial, but what role does the tourism board have in all of this to start promoting, I guess, off-peak, uh, lower demand areas versus, the traditional promotion of high season and the traditional promotion of, major concentration sites of tourism venues? Like, whose responsibility is all of this, and who should be taking the lead?
Well, yeah, I definitely think it's definitely their responsibility. Their job is to stimulate demand, right, for
Mm.
people to come to the destination, and they have some levers they can pull that could really move the needle. I think, particularly when it comes to say getting major conferences or events, right, getting people to see a destination in different lights during these time periods where tourism is just lower, and spreading it out across the time frame of the destination. I think that's really where they can move the needle, is just stimulating that demand that does not need to concentrate during those peak seasons.
Okay, now all of this kind of relates to an issue of over tourism, right? Like we're seeing high concentrations of tourists in certain zones at certain periods of time. Over tourism, there's too many tourists in a region that maybe they can't to manage it, and it's impacting the local residents. Over tourism, though, is a word that's been used for around 10 years in our industry. Our president of Skift, Rafid, has been quoted in an article that he wrote, said, maybe it's the time to retire this term. Um, Aleix, is this term looking at the issue too simplistically? And are there other terminology and maybe models or methods? You're in the business of tourism destination management, that we should be using to describe this issue and maybe to kind of solve this issue.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, and calling out this article that Rafa wrote last year, I totally agree. We should probably shift from over tourism to the term of sustainable tourism management. And I'm not just saying sustainable tourism management, in environmental terms, as we, sometimes we tend to think about it. It's that you know triangle where you got like environmental impact, social impact, and economic impact, and these three need to be aligned in order to allow for, like, the sustainable management of the destination. Each destination has a capacity. It has limits in terms of airport slots or number of hotel keys, culinary establishments, attractions and activities, etc. And ideally, each destination management official should know what that limit is, at least in terms of volume.
But
Um,
Alesh, is it that linear? Like, is it? I know my number of hotels. I know my number of days in the year. I know my number. Like, can you really add that up as a formula?
it is not as linear, but, like, there is the sense of, okay, we are over 2019 levels, um, where we at the limit of our capacity in 2019. I would say that in many destinations we were, yet we're still measuring growth in those terms. And we live in a world where unlimited continuous growth is the target, but this model won't work for the tourism industry. It just
Mm.
won't. So until we go through this mindset shift, over tourism will still be a buzzword, as you say. It will still have these negative connotations, unfortunately. But as a society, we tend to wake up a bit late when facing major crises, but maybe not too late. And we can see that with climate change mitigations and so on. Yeah, I'd like to remain positive in that sense.
Okay. Um, DeWitt, there's got to be other jurisdictions in the world, um, and you see this in your reporting, that have maybe successfully addressed the issue of over-tourism, either from a structural perspective, destination development, or on the other side, a rebranding of their tourism experience. Can you maybe highlight some of those examples and what they've done, and if there's relevance to Barcelona?
Yeah, well, it's tough because they are at the moment still in that phase of getting these policies done and these changes done, right? Because I mean, I think the past few years there's been a focus on just recovery, so there's not been as much of focus in terms of just mitigating these issues. I think people took a break in 2020, 2021, and then 2022 was still that weird year where things were still getting back up there, and in
Mm,
2023 things were booming, and then now these destinations, all like Amsterdam, Venice, now they're doing more work to really just uh, move things in a balanced approach. Balance, get tourists who are going to be, I guess, be a higher contributor, but not cause a over what do you call a overwhelming a destination. So ones that stick in my mind right now are like Amsterdam. They've been very active in trying to get a balanced approach toward tourism. I mean, they're trying to limit the amount of cruise ships that are coming in, and they plan to move their main terminal outside the city center. They've done new tourist taxes. They, as well as regulating how the red light district is operating, and they're trying to discourage certain types of tourists from coming in, party tourists as well. So, I would pick them as one example that's just very, very proactive. They also did something big in terms of hotel development. They've blocked any new hotels from being added to the destination. So I would say they're pretty active, but the issue is you need time. It takes time for things to change. And
mm,
but the biggest challenge I would say is that for a lot of destinations, their image that they have with tourists it precedes them by decades. So the image of, say, a destination where you either can like let loose or do what you want or engage in behaviors that are not helpful to a destination, that takes time to address. But we're still in the phase of running the experiment, I think.
okay. Understood. But at the same point, too, a destination like Amsterdam, came up with a campaign, uh, in the last 6 months or last year, early last year or mid last year. Brits don't come here, and I think they were specifically looking at bachelor parties and hen parties. Was that a little bit too extreme?
I mean, I wouldn't think it's. I mean, what's extreme? That's pretty tough to say. From what it seemed like to me. It was a. I've been to Amsterdam recently, and I saw myself how things
Mhm.
were.
Mm,
It is very messy. Like there's still crowds going. There's still lots of crowds of bachelor parties, people making noise. It gets very messy. With my own two eyes, I saw like how I saw what they were trying to solve, and
Mm.
they've not unfortunately solved it so much. I mean, it seemed like from their results of the campaign, they've not gone far enough. If they really wanted to make a big difference, I mean, even
mm.
the mayor admitted it in a letter to the city council, saying this campaign people saw it, but it didn't deter them. So, I mean, I would say,
So flashy headlines, low impact.
Mm.
yeah, exactly. And they're going to do more of it, but it's yeah. I mean, you could argue they didn't go far enough. Is what my takeaway from their campaign.
It's a
Okay.
bit like desperate times, desperate measures, no kind of thing. Yeah,
Yeah, but maybe not enough follow through then to actually deter the tourists from actually
yeah,
coming. Look, there's a dynamic in our industry, right? It's between industry and it's between local communities. It's that social contract between them, and it really should be, that umbrella of the destination management or marketing board that kind of interacts between these two groups. Less specifically with communities,
yeah,
what role do they play in helping to shepherd or develop the direction of tourism in their communities, and how can they be heard more? It's sounding a little bit from these headlines that it's an us versus them. It's
yeah,
us, the industry, versus them, the local communities, and kind of tourists are caught in the middle, or the
yeah,
opposite way: us, tourism industry, them, the tourists, and where's the local community?
yeah,
So where does the local community fit in this? Where should they fit into this?
yeah. But we need to ask them. We need to ask them what role they want to play. We at Skift Advisory are fans of resident service, for example, when we work with cities and destinations. Has anyone actually asked the residents if they want to be part of a tourism-led economy? Yeah, I'm a firm believer in tourism as a force for good, same as you too, for sure. Being, like the most beautiful enabler to understand each other's different cultures and worldviews and so on. But residents should have the power to directly influence policy rather than policy being defined for them without the ability of having a say. So, what we've seen is that those visitor economies that work best and thrive are those where the local communities are heavily involved, which in turn makes the visitor feel much more welcome, opposite to what we're seeing these days. And they become destination brand ambassadors for life. So there's
Mm.
really an incentive by the local industry, their tourism boards and so on to incentivize that local communities play a really, really active role in the
And
tourism
be
development
engaged.
and
Yeah.
management.
Mm.
So in this sense, you eliminate that fight or battle between the resident and visitor. So
Well, I was going to add. Well, I mean, the thing is, though, if tourism boards don't like respond to local needs or demands, locals are going to get their politicians to get active themselves, right?
Mm.
And I've seen this a few times where local politicians will come in, cut the budget, or set a new priority. Like you saw this with Hawaii, right? Hawaii has had some really rough over tourism problems where locals were upset with how things were being conducted to the point where politicians acting on behalf of their constituents actually, either denied them a budget or came close to dissolving them until they, improve their ways of how they manage tourism. So, I mean, tourism boards have an incentive to do it, but they also have another incentive, a much more, I guess, a aggressive incentive by politicians saying, do something to make our constituents happy, or you won't have much more money to do more marketing.
And this probably happened to some extent in Venice, where the locals and the local community went the direction of appealing to, the local government to actually enact some policies. What potentially could Barcelona learn from what Venice has gone through? Maybe, Aleix, I'll direct that to you.
yeah. So while measures adopted by Venice help to alleviate the situation to some extent, This may be just scraping the surface. So, but Barcelona has also limited visitation to some specific areas like Park Güell, if any of you is familiar with that. But then in this case, even residents need to then register to access it. So not sure if that really solves an issue there. Would this need to be expanded to the whole Old Town core like in Venice? I'm not sure. Venice's €5 fee to enter the city center feels like a very low barrier. So it would be interesting to measure the results and see if this actually has reduced visitation numbers. What I believe should be avoided definitely is to directly target the visitors with invasive protest actions, but target the public authorities to act immediately and effectively.
How do
Yeah,
you do that though? But honestly, do it. How do they go about doing that?
well, so in terms of so when it comes to bringing the policy, right? So Venice itself is the city is built in a way where it's easy to enforce these rules, right? So they were able to catch people at the railway, at the cruise terminal, and at the bus, right? So it's the city is structured in a way where flows of people can be easily
Mhm.
stopped, right? So they can easily implement that the policy, but
Managed. They can be
yeah,
managed. Yeah.
exactly, managed. So and so far, from what I spoke with the tourism, the deputy mayor of tourism there, and it's a pilot program, and the cost of the program is actually more than the money they're collecting, right? But it's a
Mm,
pilot, and they want to
mm,
raise it to $10 potentially. But the goal of it was to deter day trippers or to limit their impact. The people coming from the regions around Italy, right? These people who are just coming in for a bit and leaving, right? So that's the group they're targeting, and so far it's not been as successful. But what they're learning is they're going to improve it and adding $10, making it $10, making it 100 days. So that's where things are going. I mean, can it be applied to other destinations? It's tough to say because some cities they're just so hard to like. You can't stop people from going in and out through some cities that are structured differently, built differently.
Yeah. So yeah, and to build up on that, so I believe that the journey from an over touristed to a sustainably managed destination, using the terms that we were talking before, is really tough and requires some maybe radical but well thought approaches because of the complexity and number of stakeholders involved in building the visitor economy. I don't think that we've seen a complete success story yet. We'll have to see what happens with Venice. We'll have to see what happens with Amsterdam, as we were discussing. But we at least see some of these major cities taking the issue very seriously and being extremely picky about what kind of visitor they want to attract, while making somehow uncomfortable those segments, or like literally stopping any marketing approach. Like
Aleix, this sounds kind of elitist, though, doesn't it? That tourism is not for everyone; it's just for certain segments.
yeah. Yeah, no, I do. Honestly, I do not agree with that term, to be honest. And the two of us have seen that some of the buzzwords or strategies that we see in terms of mitigate over tourism is that famous. We need to appeal to high value travelers, to those
Mm.
who spend more, and so on. But mm I've seen destinations like, for example, where I live right now in Mallorca, where by trying to appeal to these luxury segments and so on, this also has driven up housing crisis in rural areas where there's like villas and so on. And so travel needs to be for everyone. We need to figure out what's the way to make it happen, but it cannot be elitist, definitely.
Well, I think it comes to how do you define success too?
Yeah.
Like is it success less heads in beds, or is it like resident sentiment has somewhat improved, or politicians are giving you thumbs up, saying you're doing a great job? Like the definition of success, or is it number of visitors that you have calculated? I think people have to clear out and say this is our goal, this is what we want to see. These KPIs, did we achieve them from our policies?
I mean, some of the destinations that we work with, they manage to implement, some successful destination strategies around visitor dispersion into lesser known areas, incentivizing off-season visitation, maybe eliminating the concept of main attractions bucket lists, and so on. So there's definitely things that we can do.
Does the media contribute to some of this though? Because they're constantly coming up with these, top 10 lists or top 20 lists, top 20 places you need to go this year, the best beaches that you need to visit. And at the same point, too, Instagram and influencers. A few years ago, my wife, my son, and I went with some Canadian friends to Croatia, and we went to Dubrovnik. It happened to be the summer after Game of Thrones came out, and I would say we were pretty shocked about our experience in Dubrovnik. Every third store was Game of Thrones paraphernalia. Every fourth store was Star Wars paraphernalia. And at the same point too, the dynamic of the city just dramatically changed. We weren't getting that real experience. We were getting this, Hollywood-esque type of experience, which we didn't want, right? We didn't really get to experience anything local or authentic with Barcelona. Sorry, with Dubrovnik, and people see this obviously in Barcelona as well. So, is are these media lists, these top 10 lists, and are these influencers contributing to some of the problem?
Yeah, well, I will say from my own, so it was funny. I remember, so I did a story on Sedona Tourism Bureau, right? What happened in terms of their dispute with City Council, in terms of like destination marketing. And City Council member told me that influencers who were coming to Sedona, hanging out in their parks and showing the beautiful nature of the destination were big contributors. He made a comment that was I found very funny, where he said, "Why are we giving money to destination marketing? We have these guru influencers coming in and doing these like weird crystal magic things in our destination and causing people to come here and recreate that experience." So I mean, I think they definitely are big contributors. I mean, but the thing is, you also have TV shows and movies, as you referenced, that are giving people a movie-esque picture of a cool place that people want to go to, and for their own personal bucket list, but also to spread on social media and say, "Hey, I was just at this spot.
I was
My life,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was here. Like I was here. Check it out." And people either get jealous or they're impressed. So it absolutely is a big contributor. But then some attractions themselves are just popular because they've historically always been popular
Mm.
since the beginning of like for centuries. Like I remember a few months ago, I saw these old travel posters right at a gallery in New York City, and you see the famous attractions that were popular 100 years ago, right? The pyramids, Big Ben, all these Eiffel Tower. Like those attractions were popular back then, and they're going to be popular moving forward. So some of it is media, some of it is just these are just human. It's just these are stories humans have. These are just attractions people have always loved, and they continue to love moving forward.
In the end, it's also like, it's about, as a traveler, like asking yourself, for example, do I want to travel to Bali and queue for 2 hours to take the picture with that one temple that has been over publicized in Instagram and TikTok by those influencers and so on? Or would I rather want to explore those dozens of ones that, not necessarily like completely out of the beaten path, but, that you can have like a much more authentic experience, like a much more personal, actually, without all of these connotations. But this is like, it's the traveler responsibility as well to decide what kind of experience they want. And I think that with time, we're going to start shifting our mindset towards the other model.
Well, if I could add, I also think media could also help as well, right? I mean, I've heard DMOs working with influencers to go to hidden gems within their
Yeah.
destination, right, and
Mm.
promoting it, so that way people would see it thanks to the influencer's massive audience. So it could also be helpful to dispersing people away from the uh, top attractions or the
Especially off season.
yeah, especially off season in particular.
Okay, final thoughts here. Barcelona. Let's try to end on a positive note. Um, Final thoughts maybe for Barcelona. Where does Barcelona go from now in terms of its tourism industry, or maybe what should it do on a go forward basis related to this issue that has just been happening? This
Yeah.
backlash against over tourism and extreme frustration on behalf of people in the local community. Let's just go with you.
Yeah. So I believe that national, regional, and local administrations need to take this issue very seriously to avoid further escalation. As residents, being locals and foreigners alike, are dealing with unsustainable living costs, as mentioned, and conditions too, but not only this uncontrolled tourism growth. there needs to be a conscious transition from tourism by accident, like all these last decades, to tourism by design in destination management and development approaches. That said, despite all this, negative like appearance in the media and so on of the last weeks, I don't think that the brand Barcelona will, become completely unattractive. I think that once we see the numbers, probably after these summer seasons and so on, probably volume will be above the
Yeah.
highest record. So, if this is success or not, we've talked a lot about definition of success, but I believe that Barcelona at least has the ingredients of being a successful tourism destination that in the future, and also an attractive city to live, which should be the premise.
DeWitt?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what's going to be happening next is I think I could foresee the mayor and city council moving the deadline for the short-term rentals further backwards to maybe 2027, 2026.
Mm.
I wouldn't be surprised if they do that after seeing the recent protests and outrage people are feeling. I think the pressure is going to continue. I mean, Barcelona is going to be popular uh, the next few months. We're still in the summer season. I hear people having trips already planned to go to Barcelona. I don't think it's going to slow anytime soon. We're going to see more pressure. It's going to keep getting much, much stronger. I think the need to do even more is going to continue in the coming months. And what that looks like, it could be higher tourist taxes. It could be just more, restriction on the cruise industry's stops in Barcelona. I don't know, but I do foresee more political pressure from the bottom up.
Thank you, DeWitt, and thank you, Aleix, for your insights, and thank you to the Skift Travel Podcast listeners. Stay engaged and continue the conversation. This is definitely going to evolve over the next few months and years ahead.